So we're recording?
Just a moment. Okay. And we're rolling there.
So this will be taken.
And we're rolling. So go ahead.
We're rolling, okay.
Keep talking.
So,
I guess before we begin, I guess
yeah.
the sort of agreement that I have with Michael was that
yes, I've got this right here. We're going to get this on camera. I'd like to explain to you wait, I haven't read, this is my first time reading this, so. I would like you to explain who you are and what you're doing, that you are under no obligation to participate in this endeavor. You're consenting to being filmed. I want you to understand that while the taping may be held at the law office of Heath Thompson, you yourself, that it is not a legal matter and no attorney-client privilege exists. The interview may be used in a documentary about the mortgage industry and may be seen by many people. This interview also may be edited for time.
I understand all that, and I think in addition to, it was specifically with my part, that if before any footage of me is used, that I want to be able to review it first to make sure I've not inadvertently said something that would violate one of the confidences of my clients. So
Yeah, we agree to that term.
Okay.
All right. All right, so first, start off, give me your name and your job.
Sure. My name is Heath Thompson. I am the owner of the law firm of Heath J. Thompson, PC.
Okay, great. Dave, can you hear any of that out there?
I can, but it's a low rumble. You guys are well above it.
Should I also to give you that?
If possible, it would be very helpful, yes.
Yeah, I will.
But we're good
I don't
otherwise.
suppose turning the fountain on would be better.
Folks, we need lots of hush out here. 'Cause we
It'd be a steady,
whisper.
that's why it exists.
And then, hey, Nikki, there's a bottle of water in my fridge.
We get, is Micah back with the water?
Not yet.
Okay. All right, I can make it through one interview.
Where am I?
Doing great so far, thank you.
Thanks.
That's
One question down.
I try to keep these questions brief. I had a list of 34 questions, and I was like, no, I'm going to keep this to about 8 to 10.
two bubbles.
Okay, well, I'm going to pause it. We're rolling, so let me kill it.
May I call you Heath during this interview?
Absolutely.
We're rolling.
Okay. All right. All right. Please, in your own words, what is strategic mortgage default?
I think strategic mortgage default is an academic term that is used to describe when people intentionally stop making their mortgage payment in order to obtain better terms on their mortgage from their mortgage company or loan servicer.
If that's the academic term, do you have a better term that you use or you think should be used?
I mean, I think that's the industry term. I mean, but I don't think that's what is understood when people are think of when they are. Let me start.
Sure.
I think that is the the industry term, but I don't think that's the vernacular term that people think of when they get in trouble. That I'm going to strategically default on my mortgage.
How did you get into this type of work representing these people, and what percentage of your business does this include?
Sure. My background is in real estate law, and so during the sort of the buildup of the real estate bubble, so to speak, we represented primarily real estate investors. We help people get into real estate transactions. We help them buy real estate, both personal and investment real estate. And then, unfortunately, 2007 rolled around. In 2008, most of those people called me up and said, Heath, get me out of this mess. And back then, there were no federal programs, there were no rules or regulations as far as, how to do a workout or a modification of a loan. And so we just sort of put our heads together with the individual banks and tried to help people through the downturn in the economy. I know it seems like a long time ago, but it was the Wild West back then. I mean, banks were closing right and left. Lehman Brothers was going. The stock market was crashing. I mean, it was a terrifying time. And so people were scared. We were scared. And so we held a lot of people's hands and worked better terms out, if possible, for them with their mortgage with the bank and their investment properties with their individual lending institutions. And then, in 2009, the government came out with this as part of the TARP program, I believe, this program called Making Homes Affordable. We frankly thought that it was maybe going to add some stability to the market. We thought that the free fall in the housing prices was going to be sort of hedged off by that, because people were going to be able to hold on to their homes more. There would be less houses going into foreclosure. It was a program designed to help really just homeowners. Since I sort of helped just in real estate investors, I didn't really have much to do with it. But in mid-2009, I started getting a lot of calls from my other clients saying, can you help my brother, can you help my cousin, can you help my, whoever with their house. They've been trying to get into this program and they just can't seem to do it. And so I read the rules and read the regulations, and I started talking to people, and I sort of got offended about how the individual lending institutions and mortgage servicers were handling this program that was designed to sort of help people, but in reality was helping the banks. And so from there we sort of got up to speed on how the rules and the regulations work, and what the ratios are and the math of the program, and then the documentation requirements of the program, and then sort of figured out the Virginia litigation aspect of it. And
How is Virginia different?
How is Virginia different?
Yeah.
I mean, Virginia is what's called a non-judicial foreclosure state. I guess maybe that's what you're asking. In Virginia, Virginia is probably the fastest state that can be foreclosed on, or for a house to be foreclosed on in the whole United States. You hear stories about places like Florida or Maryland, where once the bank decides that there's nothing else that they are going to do for you, that it still takes a year, or a year or more, 2 years, to get your house foreclosed on and to be evicted. Here in Virginia, once you are 3 months behind, you can be declared to be in default status. The bank can send you a foreclosure notice out, giving you 30 days notice, and then 2 weeks after that, they can send you a foreclosure notice, and at the expiration of that 30 days, they can auction your house off in the courthouse steps, and the house will no longer be yours.
That's quick.
That is quick.
Do you want to disconnect the phone? Can we unplug that? Is that okay?
Yes.
Can either of us reach that?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I got you, we should.
Oh no. We'll put everything.
That's fine. So yeah, 30 days after you get a notice of default, they can basically have your house foreclosed on.
Do it again.
Sorry, I'll say it again.
30 days after you've been given that notice of default, on that 30th day, your house could be foreclosed on. The next day, I mean, if they're being super diligent, they could come post.
It happens every shoot. So the 30 days.
So yes, 30 days after you receive that notice of default from the bank, they could foreclose on your house, which means you no longer own it. The next day, a representative from the bank could come by, or the new owner, if your house was bought at a foreclosure sale by a third party, could come by and post a notice to vacate. At the expiration of that 5 days, they can start the eviction process against you. 21 days after that, they could be in front of a judge here in Virginia, having you evicted out. A couple days after that, the sheriff shows up. So, when push comes to shove, 45 days, 50 days, something like that. Really unheard of, and quite shocking for the majority of homeowners. When you really drill down on it, it's maybe even more shocking than that. The notice requirements here are about mailing. It's not about actual receipt of the notices, and so there is no requirement that you receive the notice of it. It's just that the requirements are that the bank sends you the notice. And so if they have to send you notice 14 days before the foreclosure sale, if for instance they put the notice in the mail to you on a Friday afternoon, and it really doesn't get picked up until Saturday, and Monday's a holiday, you might not get that until Wednesday, leaving you about 8 days notice before your foreclosure sale. Well, we were having problems in 2009, 10, 11 with that sort of situation happening. And then, clients walking into my office and saying, Heath, I need you to help me get my foreclosure sale stopped. And so we would, put together a modification package for them for people who qualified, and we would submit it up to the lenders. Well, the lenders would say, well, because of our regulations, we're not stopping anybody's foreclosure sale who hasn't submitted a modification package 30 days before their foreclosure sale. Well, we're like, well, how is that possible? You've set up this system, at least here in Virginia, that you created an impossibility, and so that has led us to having to, we had to seek redress in our court systems. Well, in 2009, we would walk into a court and stand in front of a circuit court judge and say, Judge, we need an injunction to stop this foreclosure sale. Even the most liberal judge would say, then we're saying, I'm not doing that. I'm not changing, 300 years worth of real estate law. But once you started explaining the situation to them over and over again, and they started reading all the sort of bad things that the banks were doing, thankfully in the newspapers, that things have changed, thankfully.
Do you find that the courts, if there's a split, do you find that the courts favor the defaulters or favor the banks?
I mean, the judges are impartial, or supposed to be impartial at every single hearing. Some judges are, have said they'll never give us an injunction no matter what. Some judges will almost always give it to us. Some jurisdictions are better than others. It's just sort of the nature of judges. They're people. There's people behind those black robes.
In cases of strategic default, do you find that people, and maybe there's not a general case, do you find people are generally better off, or are they worse off after a strategic default?
I think, everyone's situation is sort of different, of course. I think when you're using that sort of term, strategic default, I mean, to me it seems like a dirty word. And so that's just not my experience with, my clients anyway. My average client is, a two-family household who's one of them has lost their income, or had a reduction in income, or if they have somebody who's been sick, or whatever the case may be. Just something, life has happened, and they call up the bank and they ask for help, okay, or their lender, and they ask for help, and the lender says, well, we can't refinance your house because you bought your house in 2006 and you owe more on it now than it's worth. So we can't refinance you. And we can't do a modification for you because you're current on your payment. The only way we can process you for a modification is if you are delinquent in your payment. And so, but we're not saying anything, but you need to be delinquent on your payment at least 90 days before we can process you a modification. In some places it's 60 days, some places it's 90. And then we'll send you out a modification package when you're, a request for modification when you are, late or behind on your payment. And so what happens is that, the average person says, well, they're my lender, we're in this together, I trust them. And so they, fall behind like they're supposed to, and then, or like they were led to believe to do so. And then try to submit this package, this modification package off. Well, what the lender doesn't tell them is that it's hard to get a modification. The federal rules and regulations are tough. Your income has got to fall within a very tight range. The documentation that is required to get a modification is really strict. And there are pitfalls all over the place. And so what happens is that 80-85% of the people that sort of fall for that or go for that end up losing their house. And so it seems to me, from my perspective, where I sit at the table, that strategic default is really the banks tricking people into letting their house get foreclosed on. And it is the spin that the industry has put on that these homeowners are taking advantage of the situation, where in reality, I think, if you drill down deeper into it, the servicers are the ones who really make the money when people are in default and people get their house foreclosed on.
Okay, so the
Just 1 second, sorry.
you're good.
Just confirm things. Okay, go ahead, sorry.
That's fine. So this idea in the media, you know, there's blogs about this, and you find the occasional story, and even talking to Michael about this. This idea that there are people out there taking advantage of the system and who can in all ways pay their mortgage, are choosing not to as a business decision. That's not the case for most people. Most people are being forced into the situation where they have to choose to stop paying their mortgage. And then those are the people coming to you.
I can only speak to my experience, of course, and for my clients. Are there people out there that manipulate the system? I think that there are people out there who manipulate the system in all walks of life, and in every industry, and in every facet of business. From everywhere. And certainly it's happened in the mortgage industry. Have I seen it? Yeah, I've seen it. But it's the small, exceedingly small minority of people who do it.
How satisfied are you in what you do in helping these people?
It's probably the best thing I've ever done. Maybe as a person, and the law, certainly.
Very good.
Yeah, very good.
Fascinating. Others,
Do you have anything you'd like to add?
other particular banks that are bad and others that are better?
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that they run in waves. It runs in waves. Sometimes, let's say Bank of America is great, and they will do pretty much anything we need them to do, and then they'll go through a period where things are not great, and everything gets log jammed up, or same thing with Wells Fargo or with SunTrust or whatever. The bigger banks seem to run in sort of these cycles, and I don't know whether it has to do, it's a management issue or it's underlying stock market, financial sort of issue. But they are, we can usually keep our clients' heads above water until the next good cycle sort of comes, and we get everyone through. Some of the smaller banks are particularly hard to deal with. The local banks that have the mortgages, the individual mortgages still on their individual balance sheets, they can be exceedingly difficult to deal with because of FDIC audit requirements. And then banks that have been taken over by FDIC or have had failed banks thrust on them by the FDIC are exceptionally hard to deal with. There's a case in point here in town, a little bank called Southern Bank. There was a collapse of a small local bank here called Bank of the Commonwealth. All of their loans, which were all terrible loans, absolutely terrible loans, were taken over by Southern Bank. Southern Bank just absolutely won't do anything with them. And it has to do with the regulations and the rules that FDIC put upon them.
What about Countrywide? Because Countrywide had a huge number and then it went into bankruptcy itself. Have you had to deal with that?
Yeah, I think Countrywide was huge. It's probably 20% of loans that walk in the door today still walk in the door today, originated at some point, or held at one point or another by Countrywide. What happened is that a lot of people would go, there were a lot of little mom and pop mortgage brokers around town in the early 2000s, and what they would do is they would originate mortgages. Countrywide was buying everything. They just bought everything, and so Countrywide would buy up those mortgages, and then they would accumulate them and pack them into these mortgage-backed securities, and then they would sort of service them. When Bank of America foolishly or whatever bought Countrywide, they started divesting out some of those pools of mortgage-backed securities, and you see them all over. Some of those loans are owned by J.P. Morgan Chase now. They're owned by Ocwen. They're owned by SLS, SPS, just Google Mortgage Servicer, those loans are still out there.
Right up to date, the hedge funds are getting involved. How's that affected your business?
Again, good and bad. I mean, there is no, sorry, it's good and bad. There is no, sort of rhyme or reason to how things are going to shake out. Sometimes, again, it's sort of, I feel like, runs in cycles. Like, we will get a hard no on some certain files all the time, but if just one day, like I said, something changes in the market, or they need to clean something up, or this pool of mortgage-backed securities needs to be sold, and they need to write it down. All of a sudden, they will come through and modify. They'll clean up a bunch of mortgages, and so sometimes it is a matter of just not saying no and stop. No, let me back up. Sometimes it's a matter of just keep fighting, and as long as you keep fighting, eventually, they will go through. Most people's modifications will go through, and so the hedge funds, a lot of those pools are, like I said, are just being traded back and forth, and at discounts, and eventually, somebody will clean it up.
Good. Thank you
Yeah.
very much. That's very
good.
Very good interview. Very natural. Very.
We're rolling? Okay. Do you see this trend continuing in the future here in Virginia and across the nation?
Unfortunately, I do. I mean, I thought that 2 or 3 years ago that this would be over with by now, but I think I was just naive. What I see as the problem at this point is that probably 1/3 or more of mortgages have an adjustable rate component to them, and so there are a lot of people right now that are hanging on, and they're able to maintain just barely because they are living with this artificially low interest rate. Eventually, the Fed will have to raise interest rates, and the longer that they put that off, the longer this problem keeps getting pushed down the road. When the Fed raises the interest rate by a point or half a point, it will have an effect on everyone's mortgage. Everyone's mortgage will go up, anyone who has an adjustable rate mortgage. Also, the other looming problem that I see out there are second mortgages and home equity lines of credit. Most of those were taken out in the mid-2000s. The majority of those had a 10-year sort of what I would call call period or due period. Those are starting to come due at this point, or at least at the very least, they're shifting over to being an interest-only payment to a principal and interest payment portion. At that point, people's payments are doubling or tripling, and so there is a greater crisis looming for the average sort of middle class, the people who have been able to hang on. Things are dire, in my opinion.
Thank you. That's very sobering, isn't it?